It has been more than 600 days since the outbreak of war in Gaza, following the events of October the 7th. Close to 1,200 people were killed on that day in 2023 when Hamas militants stormed Israel's southern border. 56 hostages still remain inside Gaza, which has been under intense bombardment day and night since. Authorities there say more than 50,000 people have been killed, with the UN warning of imminent famine, and some accusing Israel of genocide. I'm joined in the studio now by Elana, Kaminka, an Israeli peace advocate who's dedicated her efforts to promoting cross-community engagement following the loss of her son during the October 7th attacks, and Aziz Abu Sara, a Palestinian author and peace campaigner who lost his brother more than 20 years ago after being held in an Israeli prison. It's a pleasure to have you both with us. Thank you for sharing your time here on Sky News. If I take you back to October the 7th, 2023, where were you? Where would we have found you when you started to learn about what happened on that fateful day?
I was at home with my family, and it took a long time for us to understand the scope of what was happening. We had no idea that so many people were injured, and the pictures started to pour in, and it was really a shock to see the loss of life and to see the innocent victims who were impacted on that day, one of whom was my son, my eldest child.
And we'll touch on that in a second, but just Aziz, just to kind of place you as well, you spent your time between East Jerusalem and the United States. For you, where would we have found you?
I had just left Jerusalem to the States. I was just woke up when I found out, and within very short time I found out also some friends of mine. You know, being a peace activist, I have friends who are Israelis, and some of whom were killed or family members being taken captive and so on.
Elana, you referenced the loss of your son. He ended up face-to-face with Hamas militants.
Yeah. My son was an officer in the IDF, like all young Israeli people. He served as part of his mandatory service, and he was part of a search and rescue unit that's tasked with helping civilians in extreme situations like earthquakes or natural disasters. He was serving in a training base that is about a kilometer away from the border with Gaza. And his base was attacked by Hamas militants, and he knew that he was basically the last line of defense between the innocent civilians who live in the communities that were directly adjacent to his base, and he fought to protect them and to save their lives.
You say, like all young Israelis, how old was he?
My son was 20.
20, just 20. And the 7th of October, Jewish holiday, there were civilians visiting that base, and you have written and talked about how he worked to try and keep as many people inside the base alive as possible, and also in the kibbutz nearby. So
he actually, the first post that he ran to when the attack began was facing the beach, and on that beach there were civilians having parties, fishing, just hanging out on the beach, and they ran to the base to seek refuge because Hamas militants started landing boats on the beach, and they were just looking for any place to keep themselves safe. And the first thing he did was to bring them into the base and tell them that they're going to be okay, that he was there to protect them. And then later on, he moved on to a different post where his friends were under heavy attack. And again, in his mind, I'm sure at all times, he was thinking about the civilians who were in the communities right adjacent to the base where he was serving. He knew that if he wasn't able to defend them from the attack, that they would be the next victims.
We talk about victims, Aziz. You talk about the fact that through your life you have kind of built bridges amongst communities, and you had Israeli friends who lost their lives that day.
Right. Vivian Silver, who's a friend for 20, maybe more, 15, 20 years, was killed in that day. And then people I knew who lost family members, and then who had family taken or friends taken captive as well into Gaza. So, but I also know friends and family who've been killed in Gaza as well. One of my friends, Abdurrahim, had his entire family wiped out. 50 people were killed there. And that's not a unique story. That's extremely common, where I don't know anyone from Gaza now who hasn't lost a family member.
And the sad, very distressing reality for you both is you both have lost very close family members. For you, your loss stems back decades.
Right, and I think this is the story. This is not new, and this is not just something happened a long time ago. It's continuing to happen. My brother was killed when I was a child. I was 10 years old. He was taken to prison for suspicion of throwing rocks from home and tortured in prison, which resulted in his death. And what it does to you when you have family member killed, it destroys you in some ways. And I think of all the children who are going through that in Gaza or in Israel. I grew up hating anything that has to do with Israelis or Jews. And it took me 8 years to overcome that. And I think of how many people going through the same thing I've gone through when I was a child.
Elana, you nodded when Aziz said it destroys you. Obviously, time has an impact with grief. How have the last couple of years been? What does that grief look like? How have you, if you have at all, been able to cope with it?
I think as a parent, losing a child is something you don't get over. Your child is part of who you are. It's your future. It's your meaning in life is your child, and it's not something that you can just skip over. You don't get better from losing a child. You learn how to live with it, but it doesn't ever leave you. And I think for me personally, that's what's made it more urgent than ever, is to find a solution that other parents won't experience what my husband and I have experienced, because it's something I wouldn't wish on anybody. Palestinians or Israelis, I don't think anyone deserves to lose their child. And I think it's up to us to find a way to make this stop happening, because what we're doing now, as Aziz mentioned, it's deepening the cycles of violence. It's creating more anger, it's creating more desire for revenge, and it's creating more people who are going to be in the horrible situation of losing their loved ones. And that's something I can't abide by, because I know personally and deeply what it means for anyone on a personal level.
You both have had a similar response to very different situations, but as you both have alluded to, there are many people that turn a different direction and kind of double down on that resentment, that hatred, that anger, that division, that violence. Why have you taken the stance that you have? And how hard has it been maybe to walk in a different direction to others who've maybe tried to pull you in a different way?
Yeah, I think if you're lost in the desert and there's no water and you're dying of thirst, you call for water, you cry out for water. That's the normal thing. If we in a situation of killing and people dying left and right, a lack of peace, then you cry out for peace. It's the normal thing, I think, to do. And because we've gone through it, we understand what it means to lose a family member, but we also understand what it is for our friends. I would say in the last 2 years, the most people who have been outspoken for peace are people who've lost family members. Even I mentioned my friend Abdurrahim from Gaza. I introduced him to one of my Israeli friends who lost his parents in October 7th. And these two had the most unbelievable conversation and empathy. And often it's those who haven't who feel we need to sacrifice everything and until the last drop. And we saying, no, enough is enough. We are not okay with more loss because of our pain, because of what we've gone through. And in spite of it, we're saying we need to come to an end of this. Not one person have to die. We need to believe in equality. We need a solution based on equality and dignity and safety and security for all of us between the river and the sea. Palestinians and Israelis are equal human beings, and every life, an Israeli or a Palestinian, should be seen as an equal.
I'll add that what we're doing now, what the radical elements on both sides are doing, it doesn't work. It doesn't work for either side. I think what Hamas did on October 7th, it didn't help Palestinians, doesn't help the Palestinian cause, the opposite. I think it's hurt Palestinians deeply. Right. And I believe what Israel's doing now in Gaza doesn't help Israelis. It's not leading us towards any solution. All it's done is create more and more trouble for both sides. And so if something isn't working, you have to change it. You can't continue doing something that isn't working and expect to see a different outcome. And so for me, that's what makes it very clear. I think there's a lot of creativity in both peoples. Certainly in Israel, Israel's known as the startup nation, and we've shown creativity in technology, in medicine, in the arts, and absolutely zero creativity in anything related to the conflict. And I think we have to take that creativity and try and do something different, because we know already what doesn't work, and what we're doing now on both sides doesn't work. It doesn't work for Palestinians, and it doesn't work for Israelis. So let's try something else.
There's been a lot of talk on the international stage of a just and lasting peace, both in response to the current conflict, but I think also the wider situation that, as we've acknowledged, has gone on for decades. I wonder whether that will be achieved or whether there is more of a realistic reality. What is a realistic peace, do you think, between the two sides? Can they get as far as just and lasting?
First, peace is definitely possible. I think I've traveled to many conflict zones. I was in Northern Ireland recently, I was in South Africa, I was in Rwanda, and in each one's in Colombia, each one of those, if you came a year before the agreement has been reached, people would have told you peace is impossible. And then it happens. But for peace to happen, we need a true international support and intervention. We need people to really care for it all over the world. We need to be pushed towards it. Don't leave us alone and say, oh, the Israelis and Palestinians will work it out. No, we need your support. We need the British government, we need the French government, we need the American government, we need the Arab governments to all be involved. I think it's absolutely doable. Now, where the line's gonna be, 1 state, 2 states, 3 states, I think that's the wrong conversation for most of us. I think the more important conversation, what do we base that agreement on? Are we basing it on dignity and equality and justice? Or are we basing it on just talking about these lines without really thinking about the deeper aspects? Because you can have 2 states and end up with a war like Russia and Ukraine. You can have 1 state and end up in a genocide like in Rwanda. We have to think about what are the values we basing this. Ending the occupation, absolutely. A place, a reality where both of our peoples feel dignity and feel safety and feel equal.
And I think also to realize that it's not a Marvel movie. It's not, good versus evil. There are elements on both sides, I think, that have done horrible things and committed atrocities. And there are amazing people on both sides that are committed to peace and want something else for their children and for their future. And it's not useful, it's not helpful when people demonize one side or the other and try and make it seem like a good guys versus bad guys situation. There's a lot of nuance, there's a lot of complexity, there's a lot of, there are a lot of issues, and as a complex issue, any kind of solution is going to be a complex solution, and there'll be setbacks, there'll be things that need to be worked out. It's not going to be a magic solution where in one day everything's going to be resolved. But I think it's also the commitment going into it with the understanding that it's going to be hard work, that there are issues that need to be thought through very deeply, and to have a long-term commitment to helping us as communities work through those issues, and not to demonize one side or the other and try and make one side or the other feel isolated.
Northern Ireland had its biggest terror attack after the Good Friday Agreement was signed. After, not before. And so setbacks will definitely happen. That's why we need to remind people, not only do we need an agreement, we need a commitment after that agreement, knowing there will be people who will try to sabotage anything we succeed at, and we need to be united in saying, no, we're not going to this violence because it doesn't work.
How heard do you both feel? Because there are very loud voices in both communities, from Hamas to Ben Gvir, who talk a very different language to what we're hearing at the moment. How heard do you feel, and how much hope do you have that your voices and voices like those will gather momentum, will gather volume, and eventually will be the ones that dominate this conversation?
Well, we are heard when people like you invite us and get us on TVs and radios and newspapers. We are as loud as we can be. This is what we do, and it doesn't matter if people hear us a lot or not, we will continue to be speaking. With that being said, I see more and more people listening to us, definitely in Israel and Palestine. I was there last week, and it was incredible. Young people especially are coming and saying, okay, this is not working. We need to make a difference. I see new young leadership in Palestine of people in their 20s who are taking the lead and organizing and doing community stuff that I haven't seen before. So we are heard. I'm not sure if we are the majority yet, but it doesn't matter. We don't need to give up. And you say Ben Gvir and Hamas, neither of them were the majority before October 7th. Neither of them, I believe, are the majority today. And yet they were able to dictate policy and the reality we live in today. So we shouldn't give up, even if we're not the majority, because just like they did, by having a dream, by having a vision, we need to articulate what is the alternative vision. And we are doing that. And showing this is not Israeli versus Palestinian. We are united in one mission to stop this nonsense and to say we can live together.
And I think the majority of people don't know. The majority of people aren't committed to a radical ideology or necessarily to our ideology. They feel very lost, and especially in times of suffering and pain. And both people are going through so much suffering and pain the tendency is kind of to hunker down and, not think about the big issues. And I think that what we're trying to do is to say, no, actually, this is the time to think about the big issues, because from this pain and from this suffering that both peoples are experiencing, you understand that there is no other option, that we have to find a better solution, and that can motivate people. But they need to hear those words and not only hear the words of the most radical elements of both societies, which tend to be the ones that are heard, as you mentioned, on the media platforms, because they tend to be very loud about them.
Well, we appreciate you sharing your stories, your voices, your eloquence today and your time. So thank you both. Elana, Aziz, thank you so much. Good to have you both.
Appreciate it. Thank you.